Hello and welcome to another Chicago Reacts, Americans Learn. My name is Colin, and today I'm watching Apollo program. Houston, we have a problem. And this is, of course, from the one and only Epic History TV. And this is video number 3 in a series of 4 that I will be reviewing. So we've already done 2, so go back and watch those because, it's, well, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's in the past. Most people know about the Apollo program, I guess, at least a little bit. So, I don't know. I would recommend just starting from the beginning. It's always better. It's in chronological order, so might as well. So yeah. In the last video, we got on the moon. The astronauts came back home safely. We had some technical difficulties in trying to land on the moon, but yeah, Neil Armstrong knows what he's doing and was able to land safely, safe and secure, even though they overshot their intended landing spot. But now it's history. I don't know what else to say to that. But yeah, so now we're going to move on to the other Apollo missions, 11 or 12 and 13. And I don't remember just how many they went up to. Was 13 the last one? I actually don't remember that one. So yeah, I guess we'll find out. There's only 2 videos left, and they're not super long, so let's find out. So, with that being said, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And let's get going, shall we? The way to the stars is open.
1961, at the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. Just weeks later, the United States launched its first astronaut, Alan Shepard.
0.5 cabin, oxygen go, all systems are go.
He was welcomed home as a hero. But President John F. Kennedy knew that if the United States was to overtake the Soviet space program, it needed a bolder mission.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
As Kennedy addressed Congress, the United States had just 15 minutes of human spaceflight experience. No one knew if a moon landing was even possible, let alone in just 9 years. It would be an unprecedented engineering and scientific undertaking, marked by heroism and tragedy. The incredible task of landing an astronaut on the moon would be known as the Apollo program.
It also really is pretty incredible when you think about it. I mean, I'm obviously not the first person to point this out, but the fact that we, achieved flight for the first time in 1903, and then 60, almost like 70 years later, just about, we go to the fucking moon. So much progress in such a relatively short amount of time. It's crazy. And then, so that was about a 70 years difference from when we first flew to when we went to the moon, and then we went to the moon, and now it's 2023. It's almost around like the same. It's like 60-ish years. Wait, what year is it? We just watched the other video. I should remember. Was it 69 or 70 that they Apollo 11 happened? 69, right? I think it was 69. I should know this. I literally just watched the other video. Shameful. But, so 69. Yeah, it's a little, like 50 years. Anyway. But, yeah, and we really haven't done much since then. I mean, now we're going back to the moon with Artemis, but, I don't know. Our progress really kind of halted, I guess. When we're not competing against, another large world leader, the Soviets, I guess. I guess we just can't do progress for progress' sake. We have to be competing against someone, apparently. So, anyway, let's keep going with this video, shall we?
On the 20th of July 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. But now that President Kennedy's goal had been accomplished, interest in space exploration began to fade. NASA's budget was slashed. There would only be resources for 6 more lunar flights. But in its final chapter, the Apollo program would make its greatest scientific discoveries and face the deadliest perils of spaceflight.
I'm not sure we can get hit by lightning.
We still do one neighborhood has.
We got more than a problem.
Houston, say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
The flight was extremely normal for the first 36 seconds, and after that it got very interesting.
Apollo 11 landed safely, but it completely missed its intended landing site. NASA's plans for lunar exploration relied on its ability to land astronauts at precise points of scientific interest. It would be up to Apollo 12 to attempt a pinpoint landing. Apollo 12 would aim to land next to the Surveyor 3 probe, which had been on the moon since 1967. If NASA could hit this precise target, they'd prove that a pinpoint landing was possible. Apollo 12's crew was Mission Commander Pete Conrad, Command Module Pilot Dick Gordon, and Lunar Module Pilot Alan Bean. They were a tight-knit crew who drove matching gold Corvettes to work at Kennedy Space Center.
Classic.
Conrad and Gordon had already flown together on Gemini 11, and all 3 men had been stationed at the United States Naval Test Pilot School at Patuxent River, Maryland. But their mission almost didn't make it into orbit.
6.
As the countdown reached 0, huge thunderclouds loomed overhead.
0. All engines running. Commit. Liftoff.
The colossal Saturn V rocket and its exhaust trail were acting as a gigantic lightning rod. Two lightning strikes shut down the service module's fuel cells and knocked out the command module's guidance system. But nobody had seen the strikes. All they could see was a barrage of errors and warnings.
I got 3 fuel cell lights, an AC bus light, a fuel cell disconnect, AC bus overload, 1 and 2, main bus A and B out.
In Mission Control, Flight Director Jerry Griffin was moments from calling an abort. But a young flight controller named John Aaron was able to interpret the chaotic data and come up with a solution. With no time to explain, he relayed an obscure instruction to the crew.
Apollo 12 Houston, try FCE to auxiliary, over.
NCE to auxiliary.
FCE to auxiliary.
The command was so obscure that neither the flight director or Conrad had any idea what it meant. But in the Lunar Module pilot's seat, Alan Bean understood Aaron's solution. He switched to a set of backup electronics that had escaped the lightning strike, and the mission was back on track.
I'm not sure we can get hit by lightning.
The problem had been diagnosed and fixed within moments. It was a testament to the rigorous training of the astronauts and mission control staff. The crew of Apollo 12 continued their journey to the moon and made a safe landing. When Pete Conrad set foot on the lunar surface, his first words lacked Neil Armstrong's gravitas, but he more than made up for it with his delight.
And that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me.
if you have to, you know, follow up the first words said with the first steps on the moon, might as well be a little silly about it, you know. Just why try to say something profound when how can you beat one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind? You can't beat that. So I appreciate that. Whoopee! Hell, if I were to go on the moon, I'd probably say the same thing.
I'm going to step off the pad. Ooh, is that frosting?
As he looked around the landing site, he saw that their mission had been accomplished.
That's what I see sitting on the side of the crater. The old surveyor, right? The old surveyor, yes, sir. It can't be any further than 600 feet from here. How about that?
Apollo 12 had made its pinpoint landing next to the Surveyor 3 probe. It was located in Oceanus Procellarum, also known as the Ocean of Storms.
What is this image that they keep showing with the lightning? Like that looks like it's just like a cartoon of a moon or an asteroid or something. Like, what is that? I mean, it looks like something out of the like late 60s, early 70s, you know? Like, I don't know, was that something they used in mission control as like a representative of something? Like, I don't know. I'm just wondering about that, but doesn't really matter.
Now, NASA had sent astronauts to the moon 4 times, including 2 successful landings. But if lunar flight was starting to look routine, the next Apollo mission would be a terrifying reminder of the dangers of spaceflight.
NASA will claim that they are absolutely not superstitious, but I'll bet you my last dollar they'll never name another spacecraft 13. Yeah.
The third lunar landing attempt marked a shift in the Apollo program. Previous missions had largely been test flights of the spacecraft. Apollo 13 would focus on scientific discovery. It would land at the Fra Mauro Highlands, whose ancient terrain could provide insight into the origins of the solar system. Adapting a motto from the US Naval Academy, the mission patch features the words Ex Luna Scientia, from the moon, knowledge. But before the crew of Apollo 13 reached the moon, a disaster would leave them fighting for their lives. The mission commander was veteran astronaut Jim Lovell, who had travelled further and spent more time in space than any other astronaut.
Is that the one that Tom Hanks played in the movie? It's been a while since I've seen it. I don't remember who played who. And Kevin Bacon was in it too. I don't know who the third actor was. Yeah, like I said, it's been a minute. Anyway.
Between his Gemini 7 flight with Frank Borman, his Gemini 12 flight with Buzz Aldrin, and his trip around the moon on Apollo 8, he'd spent 572 hours in space and travelled almost 7 million miles. He was joined by 2 rookie astronauts, Lunar Module pilot Fred Hayes and Command Module pilot Ken Mattingly.
Hang on a second. Wait. He was aged 34 in this picture? I mean, it's not just that, you know, he's losing his hair, but it also looks gray, like at 34. Damn. I guess he's seen a lot of action or something, you know. Being an astronaut and a pilot like that can't be. Well, he said he was a rookie astronaut at this time, so I don't know. Was the first man? He's a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy, so he's probably seen some action. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out why this guy looks so old for 34. I mean, I'm like looking at myself now. I don't know. My facial hair probably ages me a little bit, but I'm not 34. I'm close. But I don't know. Am I judging this guy too hard? How old do you think I am? Let me know in the comments. I might regret asking that, but we'll see.
But just 2 days before launch, Ken Mattingly was grounded after being exposed to German measles, and replaced by another astronaut, Jack Swigert. Swigert was considered an excellent pilot, but the last-minute change was a difficult blow for a crew that had trained so intensely together.
This is the crew of Apollo 13. Wish everybody there a nice evening, and we're just about ready to close out our inspection of Aquarius and get back for a pleasant evening at Odyssey.
The Apollo 13 crew had just completed a live TV broadcast on their way to the moon. But it went no further than mission control. With public interest in the Apollo program fading, no US TV network would carry their show. As the astronauts packed away their camera equipment, there were a few housekeeping.
What do you say?
TV broadcast on their way to the moon. But it went no further than mission control. With public interest in the Apollo program fading, no US TV network would carry their show.
See, that's what I was trying to... I didn't catch why they wouldn't carry their show. Would it just... Even if it's fading, man, like, what? Seriously, no one? What? Literally all it takes is, like, for 2 missions to the moon, and then people are just over it. It's no longer mind-blowing that we're able to do that? That's sad. Sad. Yeah. I mean, I'm like one of those people that could just, like, chill out watching the International Space Station just live stream. You know, it's relaxing. It's calming to watch the Earth kind of pass by, or the International Space Station just fly over the planet. It's calming. Oh, maybe I'm weird. Let's keep going.
Show. As the astronauts packed away their camera equipment, there were a few housekeeping procedures to take care of.
13, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like you to stir up your cryo tank.
The command and service module was powered by 3 fuel cells that generated electricity by mixing hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen was stored as a very cold liquid in 2 storage tanks. In zero gravity, the temperature and density of the oxygen could become uneven in different areas of the tank, which made it difficult to measure how much was left. The solution was to stir the liquid oxygen with a fan. During a ground test just a few weeks earlier, a heater inside oxygen tank number 2 was accidentally left on, and its interior was baked to over 500 degrees Celsius.
Ooh.
This damaged the Teflon insulation around the wires leading to the fan. When Jack Swigert turned that fan on, electrical current arced across the wires, starting a fire. The pressure of expanding gas turned the oxygen tank into a bomb.
Okay, we killed the one overhead. We got more than a problem. Okay, one.
Houston, say again, please.
Two pressure. I don't know what it is. Houston, we've had a problem.
As the staff at Mission Control frantically tried to understand what had happened to the spacecraft, Lovell glanced out of the side window of the command module.
It looks to me that we are offending something. It's a gas of some sort.
Their second oxygen tank had also been damaged in the blast and was bleeding its contents into space. Soon, there would be nothing left for the astronauts to breathe, let alone to generate electricity. There was one chance for survival. Apollo 13's lunar module, Aquarius, had oxygen, fuel, and a descent engine that could be used to put them on a course back to Earth. The crew shut down the command module to preserve its tiny reserve of battery power for re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. and all three of them climbed into the two-person lunar module. Conditions were cramped and bitterly cold. NASA staff worked around the clock to solve countless engineering and navigation problems that put the astronauts' lives in constant danger. One of the most serious problems they faced was stopping the astronauts from being poisoned by their own exhaled carbon dioxide. The lunar module used round canisters of lithium hydroxide to filter carbon dioxide from the air. But there were only enough of these canisters to support 2 astronauts for 2 days. The command module used a similar system, but those canisters were square-shaped. Fortunately, to provide an emergency backup, NASA had developed a procedure during preparation for Apollo 8 to build an air purifier using a lithium hydroxide canister and items found in the spacecraft. The makeshift device was made of cardboard, tape, and an astronaut's sock. But it worked perfectly and removed the poisonous carbon dioxide from the cabin's atmosphere.
Yeah, I guess there are worse things than breathing through an astronaut's sock. Yeah. I mean, they weren't actually like, they hooked it up to something and it was just filtering through the air. They weren't like hooking it up to their mouth and breathing through that, right? That's not what I was. Maybe that's what I must have. Anyway. Still, the air is going through a sock. I guess it's better than dying, though. I think there's probably worse things that astronauts have had to do while being in space, you know? I won't go into it, but just the act of having to use the restroom is probably much worse than a sock. I think I overreacted.
Having survived the flight back to Earth, the crew faced re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. They climbed back into the command module and jettisoned Aquarius, which wouldn't survive re-entry.
We got the events, Mike. Farewell, Aquarius, and we thank you.
The command module had been powered down and left in freezing conditions for days. Its heat shield might have been cracked when the oxygen tank exploded, or its parachutes might have frozen solid. The astronauts were expected to be out of contact with Houston for 4 minutes during re-entry. But 4 minutes passed, and then 5, with no word from the crew. But after 6 agonizing minutes, Odyssey reappeared. The astronauts had survived. Apollo 13 failed to land on the moon, but against all the odds and through incredible determination and ingenuity, NASA brought Lovell, Hayes and Swaggart home safely. The mission became known as the successful failure.
Successful failure.
Apollo 14 would see the unlikely return of one of America's original space heroes, Alan Shepard. Launching aboard a tiny one-person capsule, Shepard became the first American in space in May 1961.
Oxygen, go! All systems are go!
He was due to command the first mission of Project Gemini, but he began experiencing bouts of extreme dizziness and nausea. He was diagnosed with Meniere's disease, a disorder of the inner ear. There was no known cure, and it seemed he would never be assigned to another spaceflight. Shepard was appointed Chief of the Astronaut Office, overseeing crew training and mission planning. Outside of NASA, he also made a small fortune investing in real estate, banking, and oil drilling. But he was determined to fly in space again. In the summer of 1968, he underwent an experimental and risky surgical procedure to correct his disorder. Now, Shepard would return as the commander of Apollo 14.
Nice.
But Shepard's struggles continued. The mission was almost overcome by glitches on the way to the moon. After launch, the docking mechanism between the command module and lunar module wouldn't engage. Before lunar descent, the computer tried to abort the landing and had to be reprogrammed mid-flight. Finally, the landing radar stopped working just as the crew were approaching the surface. But Shepard had come too far to be stopped by glitches. With the support of Mission Control, he and his crew overcame these problems and made a perfect landing. The closest yet to their target. Over the course of 2 moonwalks, Shepard and his lunar module pilot Ed Mitchell ventured further from their lunar module than any previous astronauts. They climbed steep terrain, investigated ancient craters, and gathered more rock and soil samples than Apollo 11 or 12.
Didn't they at some point also have, like, lunar rovers? When did those come into play? You know? Was that ever actually a thing? That wasn't just in the movies, right? That I imagine saying that? Because I could have sworn I've seen footage from these Apollo missions on the moon of them on rovers. Am I crazy? I don't know. Maybe we'll see one in a couple seconds.
With his mission objectives completed, Shepard brought out a golf ball that he'd smuggled in the pockets of his spacesuit. Using his sampling tool as a club, he teed off next to the lunar module.
Miles and miles and miles.
Wait, what did that say? I went really fast. Didn't get a chance. Equipped with his 5 senses, man explores the universe around him and calls the adventures science. Ah, there we go. Lunar rover, right there. See, I knew they were coming. But, yeah. You can't blame her for thinking I may have hallucinated that or thought it was in a movie or something. Anyway. Memory's fickle, isn't it?
The final 3 missions would be the most scientifically productive, and they were equipped with advanced hardware. Their upgraded lunar module had enough supplies to support astronauts for 3 days. New spacesuits and backpacks enabled moonwalks as long as 7 hours. And the new lunar rover allowed astronauts to explore much larger areas of the moon's surface. Meanwhile, the command module pilot conducted extensive surveys of the moon from orbit, using a new suite of cameras and scientific instruments. Dave Scott, on his 3rd spaceflight, would be the commander of Apollo 15. The crew made one of the biggest geological discoveries of the program when they unearthed a chunk of anorthosite, a piece of the moon's primordial crust, 4.5 billion years old.
They're really just kind of like skipping through these now. Was that it? Was that the only like interesting thing that had come out of Apollo 15? Nothing else? Am I going to have to do my own research now? No hate to Epic History. They do a great job. I'm just teasing. I don't know why it came out like that. It's like a start. Let's keep going. Let's just brush past it.
Apollo 16 was commanded by John Young, who had already flown to the moon on Apollo 10. The lunar module pilot was Charlie Duke, and the command module pilot would be Ken Mattingly, who had lost his place on Apollo 13 just days before the launch, and was finally getting his chance to fly in space. Young and Duke spent 3 days on the lunar surface, traveling great distances with the aid of the lunar rover. But now, budget cutbacks had brought the Apollo program to an early end. Apollo 17 would be its final flight.
Earth is the cradle of humanity, but one cannot live in a cradle forever. I mean, I get the sentiment that he's saying there, but I mean, as long as Earth is habitable, we should stay here. At least some of us, If we can make, homes on other planets, sure. Let's go out and explore and expand ourselves throughout the cosmos. Why not? But Earth is home. It'll always be home and in the heart. Let's keep going.
On December the 7th, 1972, Apollo 17 prepared to depart. It was the only night launch of a Saturn V. The rocket's blazing exhaust plume lit up the sky at Cape Kennedy. The final mission was commanded by Gene Cernan. His command module pilot was Ron Evans, and the lunar module pilot was Harrison Schmitt. On this final mission, Schmitt represented a first. A professional geologist, he was the only scientist astronaut to walk on the moon. Apollo 17 landed at Taurus Littrow, the most geologically complex site yet visited. Cernan and Schmitt spent a total of 22 hours walking on the moon. They travelled 19 miles across its surface, and they collected more scientific data than any other mission. But after 3 days on the moon, it was time to leave. Cernan and Schmitt would be the last humans to walk on the moon in the 20th century. But as the Apollo program came to an end, NASA was preparing for new adventures in spaceflight. The first US space station, Skylab, would launch in 1973, aboard an Apollo Saturn V rocket. In 1975, the United States and the Soviet Union flew a joint mission, the Apollo-Soyuz test project. It was the final flight of an Apollo spacecraft, and the symbolic end of the space race. 1981 would see the first flight of the Space Shuttle. The mission was commanded by Apollo astronaut John Young, and it ushered in the next era of spaceflight. But for the Apollo program, 1972 was the end of the road. As Cernan climbed into the lunar module at the end of the mission, he bade farewell to the moon and shared his hope that humans would soon return.
And as we leave the moon in Taurus Littrow, we leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and in hope for all mankind.
Last person to step it on. Aha, see, the Artemis program. Yeah. First woman and first person of color on the moon. and develop technologies for the first crewed mission to Mars. Hey. Cool. Oh, it was playing.
Thank you to our Patreon supporters for making Epic History TV possible. Visit our Patreon page to find out how you can support the channel, get ad-free early access, and help to choose future topics. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter for extra Epic History content and regular updates.
All right. So, yeah, so we've got through all the... Oh, you know what? I just took a look at the playlist for this on Epic History TV's YouTube, and this actually was the last in this series. I lied before. There were only 3 videos for me to react to in this series. The 4th is just, it's all the parts, all in one video, and I misread that. So that was it. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this series with me. There was a lot of info in there that I got like a pinch on my back. Eesh. Sorry. A lot of info there that I didn't know or had forgotten. And I love space, and I love science and exploration, and I want to go to space if I can one day. Probably not. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. I know that. But I dream of a future that is Star Trek-like, you know. That's hopeful. We need more optimistic science fiction, I think. But that's another tangent I can go off on. But anywho, yeah. Going to the moon is fantastic. And I'm glad that we're going back with Artemis. I hope we're able to do some more discovering and progressing in our abilities in space flight and space travel. And, you know, I don't know necessarily how I feel about colonizing Mars, but if we can, that'd be cool. You know, I do think it'd be cool to see humans living on other planets someday, you know? I don't think I would want to live on Mars. Would it be cool to visit at least, you know? Yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this series. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you want to continue seeing... Ooh, excuse me. I'm very sorry about that. Right at the end of the video. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you want to hear me burp a little bit more in future videos. Or to watch more content like this one with Epic History TV. You know? And give Epic History TV a like, share, and subscribe because they're great. They put out great content. So, with that being said, thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you next time.